Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the special WordShedNYC Poetry Reading with my four wonderful guests, Marcus Amaker, Oscar Guardiola Rivera, Zelig Komula, and Sydney Valerio. I would like to thank each one of you for being here and joining us from far and wide. I know that Oscar please tell us where you're joining us from.
In London. It's 1 o'clock in the morning here. It's a very hot summer,
Yes.
hotter than we ever had. So I'm melting.
Wow. Yeah, it's pretty hot here too, and we don't even have air conditioning. But yes, and then we have Marcus from Charleston, South Carolina.
Yeah.
And Zelig from San Francisco. And Sydney, you are
in the Bronx.
Oh, right. Go New York City. So yeah, that's definitely a question that we could all think about, like where we really are during, all the turmoil and the uncertainty going on in the world. But that's maybe for another panel discussion. Or you could incorporate that into and hopefully it's incorporated in your poetry. I want to thank also Sean Murphy, who is the founder of 1455 Lit Arts, who believes deeply in the importance of building and nurturing communities, and who showcases work of creatives and supports the micro communities spanning multiple artistic genres. Thank you, Sean, for giving us this opportunity this evening to share our poetry and hear from these very compelling, provocative, human, authentic voices. My name is Leah Elimeliah. I am a poet, writer, founder, and director of WordShedNYC. We're an all-inclusive interdisciplinary community, culturally and creatively integrated, combining art forms and interlocking ideas. We welcome all artists and collaboration. Since our inception over 4 years ago, my aim for WordShed has been to embrace artists' vulnerability, creativity, and an individuality with hopes that each one of us together feels nurtured and challenged within our internal foundation. You could also visit our website, WordShedNYC.org, if you're interested in contacting us. So I'd like to introduce my panelists, my poets, the poets for this evening. Marcus Amaker was named Charleston, South Carolina's first poet laureate in 2016. In 2021, he became an Academy of American Poets Fellow. He's also the award-winning graphic designer of a national music journal, No Depression, an electronic musician, an opera librettist, the creator of Poetry Festival, and a mentor. His poetry has been recognized by the Washington Post, the Kennedy Center, American Poets Magazine, the Washington National Opera, the Portland Opera, NPR, the Chicago Tribune, PBS NewsHour, SC Public Radio, Charleston Magazine, Charleston City Paper, North Dakota Quarterly, Town and Country Magazine, and many other publications. In 2019, he won a Governor's Arts Award in South Carolina and was named the Artist in Residence at the Gale Arts Center, a world-renowned performance and education venue. His poetry has been studied in classrooms around the country and has been interpreted for ballet, jazz, modern dance, opera, and theater. One of his poems is on Will Liverman's Grammy-nominated album, Dreams of a New Day, and Marcus has recorded 3 albums with Grammy Award-winning drummer and producer Quentin E. Baxter. Marcus created Free Verse Press to publish books from writers and students in the Charleston area. He's published 9 books and released 37 albums. His most recent book is Black Music Is, a kid's book about music history. Thank you for being here, Marcus.
Thank you.
Oscar Guardiola Rivera is an art-armed freedom fighter from Latin America, poet, award-winning author, and philosopher in exile. He's the author of such critically acclaimed books as What If Latin America Ruled the World from 2010, winner of the France Fanon Award, and Story of a Death Foretold, the coup against Salvador Allende from 2013. Shortlisted for the 2014 Bread and Roses Award, both selected among the best nonfiction publications of the year. More recently, in Defense of Armed Art Struggle from 2019 and the poetic novel Night of the World from the 87 Press 2021. He's a fellow of the RSA and teaches at Birkbeck College, University of London. His docu-series, Art and Fire, A Journey in 5 Films, co-produced with Hay Festivals, is available online. Thank you, Oscar, so much for being here and taking the time at 1 a.m. Zelig Komula is a queer, trans, neurodivergent poet, writer, and educator, born and raised in Wisconsin. They now live in San Francisco, California. They hold a BA from California Institute of Integral Studies, and they are a wonderful poet and an amazing human being. So I'm very happy that Zelig is here with us. Sydney Valerio is a creative nonfiction, mixed genre writer and performer. She daylights as an educator and moonlights as a creative. In 2016, she wrote and performed Matters, a one-woman show at the Nuyorican Poets Cafe. Her poetry is in several anthologies, including the Breakbeat Poets, Volume 4, Latinx, a 2019 Brio award-winning poet, and a 2020 Volcanista. She is currently working on her first book as a recent graduate of the MFA in Creative Writing program from the City College of New York. She's the project manager for the CCNY MFA Archives as Muse, a Harlem storytelling project, and the creator of the Creative Digital Archive Project, Perspective Matters, NYC kid who's now an NYC adult, which I think is very fascinating because the transitions could be quite something. Thank you all for being here. So without further ado, I want to first introduce Marcus and welcome him to the panel to please share some of your beautiful poems with us this evening.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I do have to just state up front, I am going through an emotional thing that just happened with COVID, so I haven't had a lot of time to process it. So if I leave early, it's because I need to process. So thank you for respecting that space.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm gonna read a couple of poems here, and these are new works. And I love sort of testing out new work. So, but by the time this gets to the page, it might be completely different, but we'll see. Like a lot of people who think like me, a lot of humans, this news about the Supreme Court and Roe v. Wade is a devastating thing for our country. And I wrote a poem about it. It's called The Word Supreme Has Been Canceled. Supreme has been used to describe many things. Most of them are divine. Oh, the divine John Coltrane, whose A Love Supreme was the ultimate example of gentle jazz syncopation. Later, the Supremes, a perfect name for 3 divine Black women who broke the sound barrier for Motown, singing protest songs with a smile. Supreme meant excellence, abundance in its highest form. But now, when my daughter hears that word, it is a form of fear and control, white supremacy and the Supreme Court. How did the word lose its integrity? Will other words like trust, love, and freedom also be overturned? I want her to know that freedom of choice is not out of context in the land of the free. I demand that her life be a part of its history. I need her to trust the definition of words like, I trust Diana Ross to sing the truth. I want my daughter to know that she is supreme and divine. I want to protect her from things that feed on manipulation and domination. I am a powerless parent in a broken political system, but I still want my daughter to know the word revolution before it too is taken away. So that's that one. And I'm gonna read another poem from an upcoming book that I'm gonna put out. And this is a love letter to my transgender family and friends. Hopefully this is a lot more sincere than what Kendrick Lamar tried to do. Okay, this is called they, them, us. The preacher reminds us that we are never truly in our bodies. The skin is a blanket for an already warm soul deep sleeping through life before heaven's alarm clock. So really, what could be more spiritual than realizing your spirit has outgrown the body it was given? What could be more truthful than knowing your true self is wide awake in a sleeping world? You are free to find heaven even if you don't believe heaven exists. You are already the God that God intended. And those are 2 poems. I could read another one, but I don't know how much time I have. My apologies.
Thank you. That's so beautiful. Thank you.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, so I can read another one, you said? 5 more? Okay, sweet. This is also a new one. So these are all brand new poems, stepping outside of my comfort zone a bit. This is called Paperweights. Sorrow can appear out of the blue like one of those post office street mailboxes. All of a sudden it's there, steady as a mental roadblock, sending you messages from another time. You thought you stamped your worries away, but they always come back, return to sender. And you allow the sadness back inside the home of your body after realizing you cannot erase permanent ink. You can't ignore memories that sting sharper than a paper cut. Grief is the car that trails you when you are running low on energy and almost out of gas. It follows you from behind and eventually finds its way into the front of your mind, inside your room, and everywhere you turn. Pain is in the trauma-sparked tears of my mother's memory-sharp eyes when talking about the white girl who, after bumping into my mom when she was a kid, thought it was dirty and disgusting to touch brown skin. Heartbreak is the animal hair you find on socks after your cat died. It's knowing that you'd rather cradle cold paws and cross the rainbow bridge together than float to heaven alone. Misery is the door that stays locked despite the fact you built the room and sharpened the blade that cut the key. Hopelessness is the untied shoestring on a walk against the wind. It's the trip that drowns you in despair before folding poems in an envelope you mail to yourself, kneeling in the melancholy of your own mourning, and fastening an emotion that grips you, grounds you, and won't let go. That's that one. New poems.
And I love that. I'm so glad that you took advantage of this evening and shared with us. I feel honored that you sharing with us your new work. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Perhaps now is a good time to ask the question, if you could maybe talk a little bit about some of the ways in which poetry reintroduces you to the self and reveals some new parts of yourself that you either didn't see or poetry helped you awaken those parts.
Yeah, I love that question. And I'm not sure that I have a really good answer for it, but just what came up for me is just, I'm always, so I'm in the practice of looking back at my old journals. I've kept journals since I was in high school. And when I read that stuff in my old age, I'm surprised at the person that I was when I was writing those journals. And poetry is that for me. When I'm writing in those journals, I'm never super aware of what the impact might be for me in the future. But with poetry, I definitely am. I feel like it's a wonderful way for me to express what's going on in my life. And I think it's a healthy way for me to deal with any sort of trauma or happiness or anything that's going on. So I'm hyper aware of the power of poetry to sort of transcend time a bit. It's like I almost can't wait to read these poems when I'm 328 years old, because I think it's going to really reveal something about myself that I wasn't aware of when I was writing it. So it is revealing parts of myself that I'm unaware of right now. And it's weird and it's funny to be hyper aware of that, but also not in control of it. So that was what came up for me when I hear that question.
No, that's actually, I think that's interesting because in a way, I mean, I have kept journals from a very young age. And sometimes I feel like, even though there is definitely change in me, I sense that some of the core things have just always been present. And it just gives you a little bit of a minute to sit and think, well, okay, so how has this evolved?
Yeah.
And, talking about poetry as a way to kind of keep up with yourself and also with the time, how do you feel as poets and writing poetry? Do you think, how can it become more relevant today? And I know that in a way it has kind of has come back to some degree because with social media, we see that, people are now writing more and there's different ways of writing poetry at this point and different ways of performing. But is there a way for poetry to be infused in other parts of our culture, you think, that maybe it hasn't touched yet? I mean, even say, I don't know, corporate America. How do we get poetry to corporate America?
Oh yeah. Well, honestly, I think like a lot of systems, the poetry system and publishing and all of that, in my mind, it's rooted in very old school thinking. So the fact that, and of course, if somebody went this route, it's completely fine. But you write something, you send it off to these, journals that not many people read, and then you wait months and months and months for a letter to come back to say yes or no. And by that time, you might have written like 30 more poems, while you're waiting for the one poem to be published. So I'm excited that a lot of poets are realizing the resources that they have to publish things immediately. Now, obviously, you don't have to publish things immediately, but I think that being relevant is how we stay, relevant. Is sharing our work as it is written instead of waiting for somebody else to publish it, because we have the power to publish our own work. Now, obviously, if Random House calls, I'm going to answer. I'm going to answer, and and they will have the manuscript for 5 years and whatever, and I'll be happy. But I do think that just like with any sort of like indie musician putting up their music on SoundCloud or things like that, we have the power to do that. So in my mind, that's how a lot of poets can keep poetry, relevant and not this thing that seems untouchable. Because when I was younger, being published seemed like you had to climb a lot of mountains, to get there. But we can do that on our own now. So it's just poets taking the power back and having control of their own work instead of waiting for a middle person to publish it for them.
Thank you for that, because as young poets, I'm not that young, but as a poet, no, it's very reassuring, and it's inspiring, and it's a great thing that you've just brought up, because there is such a pullback constantly of like, should you publish on your own, should you not? So I think that your advice is really great.
Yeah, and that might not work for everyone, but I just know for the people who I've talked to, they're really surprised at the resources that are available to us to self-publish our work, whether that's self-publishing a book or just, throwing a poem up on Instagram, things like that. When I first started out writing, that was looked down upon. And I think that shift is happening a little bit. Yeah.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you so much for being here.
Word.
I pray that everyone is healthy and gets better. And I hope that everything is okay with you. And I'm really, really grateful that you ended up showing up anyway.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
for that.
being here.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Oscar, welcome to the panel. I'm so happy that you're here as well. I know that you're also here taking your time in the middle of the night. So please, the stage is yours.
Thanks for having me, Leah, and to everyone for gathering for this exchange of gifts. I am going to share with you a few stanzas of a long poem called Base-Soaked Delay. Leah has heard some of those, others have already become something else. This is a base-soaked overlay that reverse saturates the line of succession and temporal orientation towards an untimely end. It opens an interval in time-space, the lowest rhythmic interval becoming music or wave, an axion mass scale wave which acts sometimes as if made of billiard ball parts and other times sloshing like watery waves. Waves coming together in rhythmic overlay to create a super wave that no archive can place in a final resting place. The revolution will not be televised, he said, but our protest will be sampled. A base-soaked overlay that reverse saturates black matter, opening la frontera border en el fin, a void vortex, an open wood, heridas abiertas con venas abiertas and void vortices, verde vorágine verde and whirlpools of water, for everything comes from there to which everything returns, for there is no loss, no beginning, no end, but base suspense and base-soaked relay outside of today's visual array. Consider her poetic image. US headquartered companies bought the rights to water in other countries. South of the border, these companies are strangers to the gods of those waters, were not formed from them, have never said gracias to those waters, never prayed to those waters, have never been cleansed by those waters. Is there any chance the gods may come angry? She asks. Coatlicue, Mother Earth. That is why we protest. Not the human we are not, but the thirst protest, the hunger protests, the lack of air protest. That is why we protest, because there is no air and we cannot breathe. The knee on the neck, the police baton, the crack in the skull and the soul. We know the revolution will not be televised, but our protest will be sampled, cut up, cut in and overlaid, intervals between imaginals, as in the film Now, rhythmic sound overlays to see, hear, and think sense, not to contemplate, but to action. Therefore, no wonder and no fear, but word cinemas, dwelling, rambling, wandering, we transmove, looking forwards, moving backwards, looking forwards, gathering manumin under moonlight, we dance walk, searching in futures past for the light of what is to come, but not yet, and what is gone, but not for long. We walk together, becoming alliance, without allegiance, rhythm-wise but not straight, in base-soaked intervals, until we reach the crossroads where the old has died but hangs on zombie-like, and the new wants to be born but not yet. Here a new beginning beckons from afar, back to the heart, back to the womb, back to the matter of futures past, which never stop if we stop thinking metamerically and distinguish diametrically, vertiginously the light of lighthouses from the lanterns of wreckers, wishing to lure us aground, to loot us and slave us. We know the feeling. We must break from these chains, shed this body, for it is not the body which is a kind of clothing, but clothing which is a kind of body. And what they fear is our consciousness. It is, as the poet says, take my body and make of it a nation, but one without confession and without allegiance, without the assumption of the homogeneous body of the nation, which is a simulation, an American way of forgetting natives by calling them Indians. Let's cross the border in the opposite direction, go south, at sea, to see, really see here a rhythmic overlay, a bass-soaked relay that reverse saturates without delay, for we can no longer wait. Thank you.
So this is from the bigger your book?
This is from a new collection that I'm preparing. It's going to be a long poem, so delay, basically prompted by the protests that shook the continent last year and the year before that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, your poem, I think, speaks perfectly to the question I'm going to ask. If you could just talk a little bit about the concealment that occurs through poetry. In a way, poetry is coded sometimes through language, and at times hints at something or speaks something, but in a different tongue. And as a philosopher, an activist, a thinker, and a humanist, can you talk about the role of poetry in other parts of your core values and beliefs? Because I know that poetry for you is really an everyday conversation. And I've only spoken to you maybe 3 times, but that is the kind of impact you've had on me.
That's very kind of you, Leah. Likewise, actually. You're absolutely right. I mean, we're coded by language, and in a sense, language is speaking through us. It is not us who speak the language. I guess there are 2 ways in which one can toy with the dynamics between the displayed and the hidden that you were hinting at. One is to list all the occurrences of a word, for instance, and the result of that tends to be absurd, like that famous Chinese encyclopedia that Jorge Luis Borges talked about. The other way would be to establish the conditions in which it is possible, necessary and sufficient to generalize a word. But neither of those seems satisfactory to me. So I try to create a space with the words that I am using. And I believe that there is something quite common in that respect in between poetry and music. They have the power to create a space, a new space, a space that wasn't there. When you create a space, you're also inviting others to come into that space. And when people gather, something funny happens to people. They cease to be who they thought they were and become something else. That's what poetry does. I do believe that in our time, that is a most powerful tool, a most powerful way of searching for the cracks in the house, not just describing the house, and then crack them open to let the light outside in. Notice that I made an effort to avoid the word weapon to describe a word. It is the very opposite of it. It creates, it does not destroy. And that, I believe, is what makes poetry so powerful, so primordial, like the beat of a drum. And for me, that musicality is also what matters when I write poetry.
That's really beautiful. I mean, I also know that you're an actor.
I've been very unlucky to have some directors ask me to be in front of the camera, and what I love about that is what directors do. They also create a space. I tend to work with a British director named Ken McMullen, who has a very strange way of operating. He improvises a lot when you're filming with him. So he gives you a couple of directions and then you're on your own. But the camera is looking at you. And that exchange with something that in principle appears to be non-human also changes you. There is another kind of unconcealment there, another display that happens. Cinema, poetry, and music are the most important inventions of the 20th and the 21st century. And you can see it. I mean, the other thing I was reading today to prepare for this reading, and I do prepare for these things, was Langston Hughes' translation of the Cuban poet Nicolas Guillen. It's a beautiful poem that Guillen wrote about a Cuban man who doesn't know English, and Hughes translates that into English, and the space that is created in between is magical. It's very potent, and again, that the poetry that I like is the one that doesn't use metaphors or metonymies, but transposition, the one that takes you from one position or an old falsehood to something new, to a new beginning. That new principle is what I'm after.
Do you think that poets not need or have to, but do you recommend that poets infuse their performative aspect of poetry in theater? I mean, do you feel like those kind of two, in a way, go together?
Well, we know they go together. We know that in previous epochs, whether you refer to the way in which theater was born in ancient Greece, or the way in which storytelling was told by our ancestors in the Americas, our native ancestors. The beautiful thing about those origins is that they are not origins, because they're still with us. And if you listen closely to music, if you listen closely to storytelling, the kind of storytelling that does not get published in the usual manner, but the kind of storytelling that is alive in communities, and that happens a lot, particularly in the Americas, you realize that poetry, or what we now call performance, are totally intertwined. And they are intertwined with something that, for lack of a better term, we now call rituals, ceremonials. Sylvia Wynter taught us that we need new ceremonials. Indeed, we need new ceremonials, because as we just heard before, many of the words and the old rituals are being emptied out. The ritual of laying down the law is totally empty now. The ritual of coming together to create a polity is being emptied out. So we do need to create these ceremonials, and hopefully that's what we're doing right now through this particular medium.
That's such a beautiful way of saying that. Thank you so much. That is really beautiful. This should be called ceremony. It shouldn't be. I love that. I love that idea. Oscar, so nice to see you. And now I feel like, you know what, I'll make another event earlier, and you'll have to come back sooner than later, because you always have such wonderful ideas and thoughts that you share with us, and it's always enlightening. And and interesting to listen to. So thank you. And your poetry is very provoking and makes you really think about what is happening and what's taking place, not just in you, but also surrounding us. So thank you.
Thank you, Leah.
So I want to invite Zelig to please take the stage. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you for having me. So I have three shorter poems to read. First is Lost Gifts, Airs No Ocean Keep, and it was inspired by Emily Dickinson. So here we go. There's a house on fire less than 2 miles away, and my scalp burns memory of nails graze. The 37 goes up the hill to my house. Each turn and weave through the residential cars shakes my tailbone. I read the same Dickinson poem, it would not sound so deep. Why does he get off on the sound of his voice? He tells me San Francisco deludes itself into big city dreams while it lives its middle life, and he has no clue I dread the alarms. I lift my eyes from the current's ear as he horror marvels how life must trouble my age. The house on fire less than 2 miles away, his stop at the bottom of the hill, and I have 2 miles to go, though my scalp burns and tail shakes. A smoke-born conviction plagues the new atmosphere. All right. The next poem I have is called Operating Table Oceanside, and it's about my experience with top surgery. I take off all my clothes to don this gown, a sterile room washed out. I'm under blankets, not affable enough. Disquiet, a forced salty breeze, capsized. Floating into the room, I remember lights of oppressive suns, tools of pearlescent shine, echo in the sea of eyes. I hear questions about the sailored flesh that consumes the engendered oceans of tears, of the dagger in my hand, of the self-mutiny. Now a mask of light engulfs my face, a sharp shot of warm crashes into me. Acquiescence, count down from 10. My body high tide, the table hovers over sand. Open my eyes, look down to see. I'm wrapped so tenderly, and there is a weight off my chest, topless at the beach.
Wow. Wow.
Thank you. All right, and the last one that I have is called I Could Wish for Different Voices from Inside. I hear wind and there is none, sensitive little eardrums drum. No mind's eye sees past picture, hears word, uttered sound, forgotten hum. I could wish for different, to hear voices as a voice of God, but he must hate all his children, for the voices are static in a noisy restaurant, and you can only parse the last sentence of anonymous tongue. Gibberish sounds faint and fun, heard words, uttered sound, pressed hum. I can exist, for these voices are different. They're realer than God. He abandoned his children, left them with these voices. The static has purpose in the restaurant. It's the mood, the scenery, carrying us through in anticipation to hear that anonymous tongue.
Zelig, so beautiful. Thank you so much. That was really beautiful. I actually don't think that I've heard the first and second. No, the first I think I've heard, but those were really beautiful and really raw poems. Raw in the sense of, it's funny how all three poets so far have really talked in different ways about body, but yet really connected. So it's interesting as an identifier to ourselves. I wanted to ask about how poetry creates actually a sense of identity in us or in you, but also at times abandons us.
Of course. So I think, poetry is a written art of musicality and aesthetics, at least it is for me. And unlike pure prose, poetry allows me to connect to the parts of myself I wish to see as beautiful, yet find great struggle to do so on a certain personal level. And this active transformation and making beauty, I think, also translates well to the greater parts of the world and experience, transforming our visions of suffering into something that can be held and digested on one's own time. And so I think that helps foster this sense of identity within me of, you know, finding those beautiful parts within myself.
Thank you. It's, you know, you recently started something really awesome. So do you want to just tell us a little bit about it? Because I'm just so happy for you, and I'm just happy for San Francisco community that you're going to build. Yeah, tell us a little bit what you're doing.
Absolutely. So I find trans poetics a particularly important medium and practice for myself in a number of ways. And one of the ways is that it creates this space to describe these visceral parts of the trans experience to other trans people, but also to cisgender audiences. And so that's part of the reason why I started a trans poetry workshop. It's a space to facilitate, where I facilitate, and our identity doesn't need to be questioned, but it can be more safely and accurately described through our work to one another. And so, yeah.
So do you, I mean, I am so happy for you that you're doing this. And I think you're you would be an incredible facilitator. And so I want to know what you're thinking about in terms of relevance. Like, also the similar question as to what you think makes poetry relevant today. You know, how can we infuse it more into our, when I talk about our daily lives, I don't necessarily mean like ours, because in a sense we're poets here, and I'm sure we're all, you know, pretty much infused in all of that. But in terms of just how poetry can access the outer realm, and how it could actually help others who are not very much involved in poetry.
Absolutely. So, you know, trust me, this does actually feed into what you're asking, but my biggest struggle with the form is something that I can find in a lot of writing for myself, and that's surrounding finding the words to describe things. And with poetry and myself, it's finding the words to describe emotions and sensations that are often outside of or beyond words. But it's that reason in it of itself that I think poetics are relevant today, because we exist in a time where we can very literally describe things with more words than we've ever been able to describe things before. We are able to look at language and see it at its most developed point, and it's a trend that's going to continue on to the future. And so while the medium, I think, is going to take shifts, as it already has, I don't think it'll entirely disappear. But, you know, maybe that's me saying that naively out of hope. But yeah, I think it's just going to take various shifts. And I think what Marcus said earlier about self-publishing, especially through Instagram, is one of those market shifts.
And I remember when, you make a great point. And, you know, I remember when we first met and we were in a workshop together. We're still in the workshop together. It's been like 3 years. And I remember you were very much focused on form and, you know, punctuation, for example, because every single aspect of the, you know, the poetry that's on the page had so much relevance for you. So do you want to like talk a little bit about how that is either like helpful in your own work, or it sometimes impedes when you're kind of, you know, surrounded by either other poets or in a general form, you know, what is expected? Like, do you feel like it makes it hard for you to express yourself, feel kind of accepted in that world? Because I for myself am just anti-form. I don't actually know. I haven't studied forms. I write poetry for so many years, and I have real issues. They're not issues that are, you know, like I'm taking a stand like I don't accept forms. I just can't fit my poetry into them. So I just, for me, that's been hard because for a while I stopped writing. So I just want to know what you could say a little bit about that.
Well, yeah. So I mean, like the forms that I particularly like are self-imposed, and they're very rarely are they the classic forms of like sonnets or anything else like that. It's very much again self-imposed, and so I think that creates a little bit of an easier time for myself. I don't really have as much fun with the classical forms personally. I like free-forming it, or imposing something on myself, some constraint or challenge. So I don't know. I think hopefully that answers your question, but I think
that actually absolutely does.
Okay.
You're imposing and playing tricks with yourself. And I think that the reason why I wanted to bring that up is because to whoever is listening, and either starting out or feeling the same, kind of stifled by what's expected or what we must do, kind of what we're taught. I think it's really nice to send a message that, we kind of can create our own forms and also challenge ourselves in different ways. So thank you so much, Zelig, for being here and for sharing your work and your ideas and thoughts. Sydney, I am so excited that you will be reading next. So please go ahead.
Well, thank you. And this first piece is actually based on a drink. So I'm sure people have had a tequila sunrise, but during a writing residency in 2020 in Tepoztlan, I fell in love with mezcal. So this poem is inspired from many workshops that ended with mezcal shots and into the wee morning sunrise. Mescalito Sunrise. A layered cedared sandstone salamander emerges where mountain treetops kiss sky, fuse into cider clay, unhurried stacks of adobe, spread out like marmalade. In the distance, honey pours into air, puffs of butter mingle with daffodils, dollops of butterscotch coat, a creamy sea as lavender clouds spew out embers made of gray cotton as the glowing sphere of hot gas pierces its way above, greets the town of Tepoztlan, and inebriates the waking eye with its breaking into day. So that's a little shot because the two poems that follow require you to sober up a bit. This next piece is an abecedarian, and it is entitled, My Father's Love Has Always Felt Like a Brute's, and I Carry It in My Hand. An abecedarian. A finger is in constant direct communication with the brain. As many as 100 per 1 cubic centimeter touch receptors send messages, and the distal phalanx, intermediate phalanx, and proximal phalanx bones exist under skin. And my right hand pointer finger's nail bed is framed but unmattressed, and dreamt up my great disdain for aesthetics. And when I was young, healing meant tending to a torn and decimated matrix. In science, I learned the average nail grows at a rate of just 0.1 millimeter per day. And at the base of your nail is a half moon. And some days I wonder how many people have kept their distance upon seeing my hand. And what is the last place in my body the nail bed has redistributed its stunted growth? And the most common cause of deformity is trauma. And from a very young age, I knew never to call this pain, but to call it story. I learned what it meant to carry trauma on my finger's tip. And this meant I learned how to perfect an act of looking whole, though parts of me would be eternally missing. Question, what happens when you don't carry the moon on your finger anymore? but feel its muted rotation under your skin. Recently, I read that the origin of the word point comes from the French pointilleur, which means to stab, prick, jab, mark, and it later evolved to also mean to stitch, to mend. And these days, all I want to do is be put together. And my body is a constant reminder of a lifetime process of undergoing the loss of a part of me and still have the energy to point forward and to vex destiny with every manicured session I sit in and get my hands pampered. When I was 2, I loved playing with soil. And one day that led to an infection. And while in a daze, my father's hands squeezed out all of the pus from my healing finger. X-rays later showed no bones were broken, but that the finger's matrix had been squeezed out and lost forever. And the nail would never grow back, but left an open space for me to feel a constant bareness. You're probably wondering if I've forgiven him. And I never really placed blame because it taught me to carry words instead of shame, taught my body to heal itself from a very young age, showed me how people react to a body shaped by the 1980s New York City craze, made me informed rather than deformed, equipped my tongue with words about reaching Zen, con una nota diferente que la que se daba my father. So those are 2 pieces. Leah, if you want, I can read one more or we can go into questions.
No, just please share one more.
Okay, you're welcome. So this one's entitled, and it's not published. The previous 2, one has been published, the other one hasn't. This one has not been published. It's entitled, in 2020, supermarkets in the Bronx most likely sold 20,928,265 rolls of tissue paper in the month of March.
I love that. Oh,
That's the title.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Cherry blossoms bloom behind me as I sit on the bed of the Hudson, the river whose waters witnessed and welcomed my first breath in this world. Her undercurrents soothe my body into stillness. I pour a jar full of 12 ounces of transparent golden honey into her as my eyes look side to side to confirm no police are watching me. And my offering sluggishly slips into her body, joins the motion of the waves. Soft ripples gently remind the extended slab of concrete my feet rest on, that it too deserves sweet kisses. I talk to her and tell her about my last conversation with my dad. My dad says he feels protected at work. He wears gloves, a mask, a protective suit as he unboxes food and items for people. They line up on Southern Boulevard in the South Bronx, 6 feet apart, reusable bags in hands, some palms covered with gloves, others bare, taking their chances with fate, waiting at least 15 minutes to enter his workplace. People hide their faces and suspect everyone. With boarded up stores lining the desolated streets, these moments bring his memory back to a 1980s New York City. And I think about how these days my father's hands fully stock community spaces with items that bring families together, while in the 80s, his body filled these streets with substances that tore them apart. 2020 started off with the American dirt situation, and quickly after quarantine started, the writers of the Big Five tweeted about how they were told by their agents not to write about the crisis, probably because their privilege would show as they posted videos with updated backsplash kitchens. And maybe a year from now, they will write and turn our stories into trauma porn, even though they fled New York City to another state to stay in their primary home. Yet somehow it's people of color who are always told to feel the imposter syndrome. And most days, some say I should feel that as I write on my cushioned couch while completing my third post-secondary degree. And I think this is more of what's called survivor's guilt, how I'm the daughter of a father who was in these streets in the 80s as a pharmacist, so to speak, and a mother who's a lifetime taxi. In the early Cuomo press briefings, a comment was posted that New York at this moment should legalize weed. In the middle of a pandemic, some want to get high and not die. My 3-year-old self knows there is loss of brown and Black fathers in those deals. Listen, in 2004, my dad was in possession of marijuana because he trespassed onto someone's property in Harlem. Cops were called, and not having papers, he was detained by ICE. It's 2020. And what I'm saying is that way before this pandemic, my dad learned what it means to be isolated because of status. Yesterday, I spoke with my dad, and these days we leave voice notes on WhatsApp, not because we're lazy, it's just that he doesn't read or write past the 4th grade level. Today, to survive, he only needs to know how to read labels on boxes, name brands, and shapes. And he gets to see and learn how what he places on shelves will cleanse and sanitize. And isn't this too called tracing? Containers of bleach and rolls of paper on shelves, and people line up to grab what he has packed. He, my dad, once a factory worker in a federal detention center, inmate 20,928,265. Today, during a state of emergency, my dad hears society finally say to him that he too is essential.
Thank you, Sydney. That was really beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So the Mescal shots are needed.
Well, now they're needed. But I wanted to, it's funny, can you speak about your intention? And the drive to create and form your poetic identity around language and some of the themes that you touch upon.
Well, thank you, Leah, for that question, because it centers me always to answer questions like this, calibrates me to know that my intention is, to be this bridge that I am in my family's lineage right now as a first generation of Dominican heritage here in New York, and to honor the stories that want to go onto the page through word, and honor the ones that still want to be told, because just because those who came before me didn't know how to read or write doesn't mean that the stories were invalid. They just weren't codified through word in a written form, right? So I'm always with that intention of performance poetry, because it leans into that oral storytelling tradition that we thrive in the Caribbean and diasporic communities. So that's what my intentions are, to be this bridge that's codifying through my actions and when spirit wants through my words. And that's basically what's behind my poetry.
And you do it so brilliantly and so beautifully and humanly. So, and I'm sure it reaches people across the board. I mean, first of all, the last poem, I'll have to talk to you about that, but your last poem was really just really powerful. And
so raw. I haven't submitted it anywhere. This is the first time I really read it in public like this. It's still very raw.
You've submitted here. Yes,
I shared it in this ceremony, and that's an honor. That is an honor. So thank you.
So my last question, I guess, is if you could maybe tell us a little bit about how you work in your poetry through the social, cultural, and political issues that we face both personally and communally, but particularly you through poetry. How do you work through that?
I really feel like being an educator allows me to have a soundboard on the future. So I really am able to, I'm an English teacher, full-time in the high school level. And I'm able to read stories that are classic, read stories that are contemporary and poetry, and have an ear on what I believe are the things that need to be codified because they're being repeated even in the present generation, but also what is missing, what needs to definitely make its way through word and stories. So that is my process, really. I'm an observant. I like to think of myself as a mixed genre writer, and I play around a lot with form that's non-fictional texts. And I didn't go the PhD route because I wanted to write for community. So being a creative allows me to do that, and that's my fuel, right? To take those two spaces that I also navigate, academia and just regular society, and try to be that bridge just to calibrate, right? So it's actually really selfish what I do in my poetry. And at the same time, I'm just trying to heal and grow and preserve what I see needs to be healed, grown, and preserved. And that's what I try to capture in my poetry and in my work.
So do you feel like poetry is an active?
It's political.
Yeah.
It's 1000% political and active. It requires you to be observant, which requires you to listen. And be ready to say what you have to say.
That's a great answer. That's. I think we could all agree that that's how we feel as well. Anyone that's.
Well, thank you, Leah.
Present here.
And everyone else.
Sydney, thank you so much. Everyone, thank you. This has been such a wonderful hour of beautiful work and such insightful thoughts and ideas. And I can't wait for other people to hear and for us to come back and reunite and at some point in real life. And I wish you all the best and stay safe and healthy and keep writing. And please do share all your work, whatever you're up to, so that we could, expand it beyond the corners of your space and share your work with others. So if anyone has any other things they want to say, otherwise we're done. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you.